Hi, I'm Clare Ridgway, creator of the Anne Boleyn Files. I'm here today with Claire Cherry to discuss George Boleyn. We've just written a book on George Boleyn called George Boleyn, Tudor Poet, Courtier and Diplomat, a biography of George. A question we often get asked is whether George Boleyn was homosexual. The only historian who really believes that theory is Retha Warnick in her book The Rise and Fall of Anne Boleyn. But it's a theory that's been popularised because of Philippa Gregory's The Other Boleyn Girl. We get asked about what evidence there is for this theory. So what do you think?
Well, Warnick used three pieces of so-called...
I don't know.
The two pieces of information that Warnick gives in evidence, so-called evidence, is George Cavendish, who was a secretary to Wolsey, and he wrote various pieces of verse relating to people that had been killed during the reign of Henry VIII, beheaded. And the second thing was George Boleyn's scaffold speech. Cavendish speaks in his verses about George, talking of his unlawful lechery, and Warnick considers that Cavendish was talking about homosexual acts. She also talks about George's scaffold speech. George says that he was a wretched sinner, and she says from that, taking into account Cavendish's verses, that George was speaking about homosexual activity. But there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to tie that in my view. George could be talking about anything whatsoever, and as far as Cavendish's verses are concerned, Cavendish mentions unlawful lechery when he's speaking about Henry VIII. He's talking about adultery, he's talking about lust, he's not talking about homosexuality. If he was, he'd be saying Henry VIII was homosexual. I just can't see that you can treat those verses and that scaffold speech to say that George was homosexual.
And doesn't he use the word bestiality?
He does.
With Thomas Culpeper
He does.
as well. And Culpeper warns other courtiers about bestiality. So obviously, you know, if you go with that theory, Culpeper is homosexual too.
And the whole court, because he was warning the court about their bestiality. If you look at all of the verses on Cavendish, to just look at George, it's taking it out of context.
Yeah. And there's also, she also uses the ownership of the book Lamentations of Matthiolus. George Boleyn has inscribed it, this book is mine, George Boleyn, and Mark Smeaton also inscribed "à moi, Mark Smeaton," meaning that the book was his at one point as well. She uses the fact that they both owned it to suggest that they were homosexual lovers. But we also have Wyatt's inscription in it, don't we? And various little ditties by Wyatt, which are quite funny and ironic. Yeah, because the book was a satire on marriage. Yeah. So we've got some little sayings by Wyatt as well. But I mean, we know that that piece of literature was very popular and was passed around scholars. So I think to say that that is proof that they were lovers passing around that
bit of a leap.
Well, it's a bit like saying, you know, how 50 Shades of Grey was passed around women like mad. It would be a bit like saying that they were all lovers or they were all into S&M because they passed around that popular book. So I don't think we can use that as evidence at all. Claire and I would just like to thank everyone at the Anne Boleyn Files website for asking us the questions that have inspired this video today. Thank you so much for giving us these questions and this chance to talk about one of our favourite characters, George Boleyn. Our book will be coming out very soon, George Boleyn, Tudor Poet, Courtier and Diplomat, and